I'm Mark Boris, and this is Straight Talk.
After 10 years of podcasting and over 1,000 conversations, it's been a hell of a ride. And I've decided it's time to, take everything to the next level. I've spoken to prime ministers, top business leaders, world-class operators, and some of the sharpest minds in tech and property. I speak to the best in the business, and I make it my business to do that. But there's a lot behind the scenes that no one sees, and I want you to be part of it. That's why my team and I are launching Mentor Plus. Now, it's a new website platform designed to bring you the best business insights and connect a community of like-minded people who are serious about growing in their business and in their career and in life. So we're going to launch a new weekly solo podcast featuring Q&A, where I'll dive deep into the business. I'm going to dive into life's questions and answer everything you want. But that's just the beginning. Mentor Plus members will also get access to weekly blogs from me and my team, behind-the-scenes content, a private community group chat, be the first to know what's next on my podcast, and the opportunity to ask our podcast guests questions. There's going to be business resources on this website. There's exclusive events and experiences right here at Mentor Studios. And if you're obsessed with growth, just like me, and the team are here, hit the link in the bio, join the waitlist, and I'll see you inside. Angus Taylor, welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Great to be with you, Mark.
Well, now, you are the Shadow Treasurer. Big election coming up. But a lot of people don't know who you are because, the Treasurer gets all the oxygen out of the system, the current Treasurer. And he's actually not a bad performer when you think about it in that sense. He's very good at sucking the oxygen out of the system, actually so much so I think he's even leaving his Prime Minister looking a little bit gasping for air from time to time. I need to know, and I think our voters need to know, a story about you. We don't know much about you. And when I was reading the brief, I got quite surprised. I went, wow, this guy's not just a politician. And I think that's an important point for an election because I think Australians don't want to vote for just politicians. So we need to know about your story. So take me back. Where the hell did you grow up? What's your deal?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a recent comer to politics relative to many in the parliament, particularly on the other side.
So it hasn't been a political career?
No, not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. So I grew up on a family farm in a little town called Nimidabel. At the time, it was about 400 people. Sawmilling town south of Hume in the Snow Mountains.
So New South Wales?
New South Wales, southeastern New South Wales. Tiny little town, cold high, a pretty bleak but very beautiful place in my view. Sheep and cattle, and my family had farmed there for a number of generations. And my dad and mum met down in that area, although they were both. He was the first in his family to go off to uni, and that's where he met mum. And part of a family with 4 boys, and it was a typical farming family. Business and family are the same thing when you're a farming family. It's like any small business.
Yeah, everything bleeds into each other.
Everything bleeds into each other. And, we'd be, from very young age, we all learnt to ride a horse. It's rough country, so most of the stock work back in those days was done on horseback. In fact, pretty much all of it. So the first thing we'd learn to do is ride a horse. And we'd spend days and days on end sitting on a horse chasing mobs of sheep and cattle around the place, and with other blokes mostly. There were occasionally women who worked on the place as well. You didn't always learn the Queen's English as it was then from these people, but you learn a lot about life. And those days for me were completely formative. Sitting around the kitchen table talking about the farm, what we're doing, which mob of sheep we're going to move where, what prices were looking like, what the weather was doing, whether there was enough feed. I mean, it just is all consuming, Mark.
And fundamentals.
Absolute fundamentals. I mean, you watched animals die in front of you. You have to kill them because, there's a problem and you have to put them out of their misery. And these are really formative things, I think, which I realise are very different about my background than others, that it's, at the sharp end of a small business, fighting the weather, the prices. And often, frankly, my family felt like they were fighting much bigger forces that they couldn't control, government, big businesses. And I think that's how a lot of small business people feel all the time. So that was the heart of my upbringing. I think it came to a head in the early 80s when we were carrying quite a lot of debt, and it was a really terrible drought right across the east coast of Australia in the early 80s, and that was a very tough time. But we got through, and like other farming families, you're resilient, you fight your way through and you get there. And so for me, that was the most formative part of my upbringing. A very loving family, close, very loyal family. My three brothers today, we're still very close.
Where do you sit in the...
I'm third out of four. Third out of four.
We're
We're all pretty close in age. So, we played a lot of sport growing up against each other.
And who's your footy team?
Back in these days it's Canberra. Of course, the Raiders weren't around. Or the Brumbies.
That's true.
They weren't around in those days.
Yep.
So we all had different teams, but then when Canberra turned up,
And you're a New South Wales state of origin supporter.
Yeah, of course.
So, do you like your rugby league or rugby?
Well, look, I grew up in my early years playing for Nimerdabel Public School, rugby league, and then switched as I got older to rugby.
And I think it's important, like I'd like to understand, because I didn't grow up in a farming family, although my dad was a farmer in Greece, but when he came to Australia, he was a factory worker. But I'd like to understand a little bit more about the dynamics in a family. Well, maybe you could explain a bit more the dynamics of a farming family when things get tough. Like if you went through that drought period, I remember when we had recessions in Australia. We had a recession in 82. I remember when it was 74, we had a recession. My dad always lost his job whenever there was a recession on, which is normal. What happens and I know what that family dynamic was like. What was your family dynamic like, say, during a drought, when you're watching sheep die, sheep and cattle, I presume?
Yeah.
Die, not be able to get enough food from you, couldn't get enough grain or whatever it is you're feeding them. How does a family operate?
It's cathartic. I remember that 82 drought, and we had a similar situation which was more driven by prices in the early 90s because the wool price collapsed and people were shooting sheep. Because they were being paid to do it.
Because you couldn't afford to keep the sheep.
Yeah, because there were too many. And so the government paid you to shoot to cull, and it was terrible. But the early 80s was probably the really formative one for me because I was 15, 16. And the place was just bare. It was bare. And the sheep were dying. And it was, I'll never forget it. I mean, the place was covered in rabbits. For some reason, the rabbit numbers increased, and so we'd be out, and you could get a rabbit from 200 metres away because there was no grass. And
you could see them everywhere.
But the family dynamic's interesting. I mean, it's just stress. Like at the end of the day, there's this quiet stress that is not there in better times. That I think everyone in the family feels, because it's not like your dad or mum, whoever it is who's the primary breadwinner, is going off during the day and then coming back and it's a disconnected place. It's all around you. You walk out the back door and there's the shed and there's the cattle yards and it's just there. And so
you can't avoid it.
You can't avoid it. And I knew mum and dad were carrying real stress during that time, and I think everyone was. It's also in the community because there's that stress for everybody. There's a stoicism, I think, in farmers and in small business people, which I have just massive respect for. I see it now because there's so many small business people struggling at the moment, people running cafes, people in the construction industry. And I see that stoicism, which is what gets them through, and it's an incredible strength. But you've got to have that.
Is it a performance, though? Do you think? I mean, and why do you think your mum and dad did it? Like you experienced this stoicism in the greater community. Why do you think people do it? I mean, I've often wondered about this. I mean, I've been through it myself, but I know why I did it. But why do you think people, generally speaking, in your community, when you're growing up, present this stoicism? Is that an Australian thing, do you think?
I think there is something very Australian in it. I think it's very, very clear in farming communities because you've got lots of uncontrollable stuff coming at you. The weather, prices, government regulations, and all of those things are coming out. You can't control them. And if you spend your time thinking you can control any of this, it'll send you crazy. So you've got to work out how to go with the punches. And so it's bred this incredible resilience, this incredible strength that I see in those communities. I feel very proud to have grown up in this little community of Nimerdabel, in deep southern New South Wales, because it has that kind of culture, and I learned an enormous amount from it. But I see it in Australians wherever I go to. It's not restricted to any one place. And I think it's what's given us great strength as a country. I think that is all part of our, the Gallipoli spirit in many ways. That's what's there. We didn't control what was going on around us at that time. And we celebrate this deep resilience and stoicism. And I think it gives us great strength.
It's funny. I was just thinking when you were saying that, I was just thinking to some extent, Australia Day represents lots of things to me, and I don't want to get too political on it, but like celebrating on Australia Day, our stoicism and our resilience is a really important thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever date that people decide to do it right now, it's in January. That's the date I'm happy about. But just having a day when we celebrate these things, these characteristics of Australians, whether they're new Australians or someone who's been on the land for 5 generations, doesn't really matter. But that common denominator between people who identify as Australians, that stoicism and that resilience, is pretty bloody important.
Yeah, and I think you asked earlier a really good question, which is why do people do it? Because I see everywhere I go, all through my electorate, people going through hard times, and what keeps them going. I think we're a deeply aspirational country, and I think that aspiration is fuel for us. It's fuel for Australians. We want to get ahead. We want to have a go. We want to have a crack, and we give others a go too. I mean, this is all part of our great spirit. So I do feel very, very privileged to have had that as part of my upbringing. I think it does also breed this deep loyalty and love, which is in my family. Where farming families aren't always people who express their love and affection for each other. Yeah, it's totally not part of the culture. No. But I tell you what, underneath it's there, and that deep sense of loyalty to your mates, to your friends, to your family, to those who you're close to.
Loyalty being that I will always be there.
I will always be there. We'd go off to Nimandale Public School, four boys, 4 brothers. And we'd be brawling with each other when we were at home. But I tell you what, when we got into the schoolyard, if anyone had a go at any one of us,
yeah. Well,
there was always that loyalty.
Well, Phil Gill once told me a very funny story, and has a very funny saying about that. And he was coaching Origin, and I was sponsoring at the time, and he said to me, he didn't say to me, he said to the group, but I was in the room when he said it to the boys, the players, and he basically said, the way we've got to think of ourselves is as like a cat. And on the field, the way you got to think of yourselves as a group, if you pull the cat's tail, you get the whole fucking cat.
Right.
And that's
exactly.
Like a family. Yeah. That's how you're sort of describing you.
Yeah.
We're a cat. We're up to all sorts of mischief. Yeah. But you pull our tail. Yeah. You get every one of us.
Yeah.
And then and I know that people today would say, oh, well, you're not let it be. I'm not suggesting violence, right?
No.
I'm talking about just support.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's to me, that's proper loyalty in a family. The family, you can have your arguments, but when it's on, we're a block.
I think this is really common in small business families in general.
Become a block.
You become a block. You're working together. You've got the shared goals. You're walking towards your own goals as well as each other's, and it's actually a wonderful, wonderful thing. I mean, you understand teamwork. I think that in a way that perhaps others don't.
So, how do you? And now you're in the game of politics. Yeah, I want to go through the process how you got there, but now you're in politics. What happens? What do you think to yourself sometimes in politics when you're all politicians, Labor, Liberal, Greens, blah, blah, you're all together working for the best of our country? You must think to yourself, oh my God, what's happening here when everybody starts, let's call it quarrelling amongst each other, and you say, can we just get to the number of what we're here for?
Yeah.
We're here to make this country better. We're here to look after our constituents across the whole country.
Yes.
We've got stuff happening all around the world relative to us. Do you ever sort of get to a point where you get completely exasperated by the political process, not having been born in the political process?
Yeah, 100%. I would say I've seen that not just in politics. I've seen that in business in
totally.
my career before politics too.
Yeah, but that's when we're competing with each other.
Correct. And I played a lot of team sport growing up, and just described to you that sense of team and loyalty that I've always valued. So when I see teams being dysfunctional, I don't like it. And I didn't come up through student politics or anything like that. So what I've seen in politics is some incredible behaviour, the best of human behaviour. You also see some of the worst, Mark, and that's always disappointing. I think the thing that keeps me going is that the people I meet in this job give me hope every single day. Both people in the parliament, and there's good people in the parliament on both sides of the parliament, and people right across the country, because there are incredible people, despite the fact that we do see bad behaviour, despite the fact that there is dysfunctional behaviour from some at times. The truth is there's enough good Australians trying to do the right thing that I have huge hope for this country for the future, as we've seen in the past.
So, okay, you're at school. You finish school. What happens after that? I mean, you're on the farm. Did you go to university somewhere?
Yeah, so I went off to Sydney University, as my dad had. As I said, he was the first in his family to do that, and he went off and he was originally doing agriculture and did vet science. I was going to be a vet.
As in, he did ag. You did ag science, or
no? He started doing ag and then did vet, and
Yep.
he was then a qualified vet, and
Okay.
then went back to the farm.
Right.
But obviously used his vet skills on the farm.
So you did vet science?
Well, I was going to, and then right at the end, I changed my mind, and I still can't quite work out why, and did economics or combined law degree, right? And maybe I was rejecting my dad and my older brother who'd done vet science as well. I thought, well, I'm going to do something different. So I did combined economics law at Sydney University.
Well, let me just stop you there for a second, because that's quite interesting from my point of view, because I happen to know, because in my class at school, I was not a country boy, grew up in the west suburbs, but in my class at school, not that many kids went to university, but probably the kid who was at the top of the school, probably always coming first or second in most of the subjects, he got into vet science. But as I recall, this is in 1970 something, but as I recall, I did a commerce law degree, but as I recall, for him to get vet science, I think they only took 30 students at Sydney.
Yeah.
I think it was considered to be the toughest degree to get into at Sydney University at the time.
Alongside medicine, they're about the same.
We had one of the boy did medicine,
Yeah.
a couple did com law, and one did vet science. And actually, the guy who did medicine became a priest after he did medicine. He became a doctor, but he became a priest after that. Anthony Coudert. So you must have done pretty well in HSC to get into that.
Yeah, sure. And
Were you a studious kid then?
Well, my parents were huge believers in the power of education. Dad was obviously a farmer, but he believed education really mattered, and my mum did as well. Her father was an engineer, civil engineer, a New Zealander, South Island New Zealander, who'd come over and was living in Cooma, and they wanted us to have a university education. They always encouraged us to learn. I mean, Mum was teaching us to read before we went to school, and so that I was really privileged to have had that, and that this great love of learning and of knowledge and the power of it. And so, went off to uni, combined law, and loved it. And there was a lot of business around our kitchen table. There was business, there was politics, and there was farming.
Mm.
And so I really loved the sort of the business side of economics and law.
Were you in those days? Were you in Phillip Street?
Yeah, at the law school. Yeah,
Street, okay.
I was. Yeah, for some of the last years before they moved.
Before they moved,
Yeah, that's right. So, and loved all that. I particularly loved the economics. I just felt that it helped me understand the world around me and how it worked, and I could explain what was going on. And it really appealed to me because we'd had economics around us growing up on the farm the whole time, right? I mean, the wool price, the meat price. It was economics, and so I loved it, and did okay, and managed to get a scholarship to go off to Oxford and study economics postgraduate.
Postgraduate economics, like a master's.
Yeah, 2-year masters. It's sort of much of the way towards a PhD. I didn't want to finish the PhD. I wanted to get out into the workworkforce by then. I had enough of academia.
And what did you major in your master's degree? So. I don't know about there, but I know you're in a suburb where I'm. You did core subjects and then you did a thesis.
Yeah, that's right. And I did. Well, I'd done an honours year at Sydney University, but I did my thesis at Oxford in an area called industrial organisation, which is about how industries work and businesses work. But the thesis was on the brewing industry, the beer industry in the UK. And Margaret Thatcher had actually said to the big brewers, "You've got to sell off some of your pubs." Because you're doing over the UK beer drinker. It's unfair what you're doing. You're tying up the pubs and you're forcing a lack of competition in the industry. And so she forced the big brewers to sell off pubs. So my whole thesis was on that. Where most people doing a thesis, at a place like that, no one else is interested in it because it doesn't relate to them. But I got to tell you, everyone was interested in my thesis because, we'd all go down to the local pub, which is a big part of...
And getting ripped off.
And everyone, we were students, we didn't have a lot of money, so everyone felt like they were getting ripped off. So it was a fun thing to do.
That's a very interesting thesis to have done in the wake of the ACCC finding recently in relation to Coles and Woolworths.
And divestiture, because it was actually a divestiture. It was a divestiture case, and Margaret Thatcher had led it. So that was... That's
a very interesting thesis to have done.
It was. And look, it taught me, the bigger thing is it taught me about how industries work, how businesses make money, how they don't, how an economy works as well. And that was the great power of doing economics. I think it's a really useful discipline to have, whether you go into business or politics or many other areas of life. And so, I loved it, and got a job at the end of my time at Oxford to go and work with McKinsey, which is a consultancy. A consultancy firm. Yeah.
And what are the sort of things it's very transactional at McKinsey's, depending on who the clients are, but what are some of the things you worked on?
Well, the first big project I did at McKinsey was working down at Port Kembla. So there was this
back
sense,
here in Australia, McKinsey.
Yeah, I came back to Australia. I didn't want to work in the UK. I wanted to come home. I loved Australia, and I'd had 2 great years in the UK, but 2 and a bit. But wanted to come back, and so came back. And I think there was a sense amongst the senior people there. Let's get this guy to put a bit of dirt under his fingernails. Now, I come from a farming background. I don't think I really needed that, but anyway, I certainly was thrown straight into it. So I was on the front line of the steel mill down, at Port Kembla. Right, our office we were working out of was right in the middle of the main, near the slab caster, where the big slabs are poured at the steel mill, and working to make them more effective, more efficient. At a time when the steel industry in Australia was under huge pressure, there was a real risk it was just going to shut and go offshore. At that time, it was going off to Japan or Korea. And so we needed to make it more competitive and more effective to survive. And so I was part of a project for an extended period of time to help to ensure Port Kembla survived, and it has. And I think that work back in the early to mid-90s was really profound in helping a really important and iconic Australian business to survive. So very proud to have been part of that. I did lots of other bits of work. One of the others I was most proud of was when I got to partnership there, was working with the New Zealand dairy industry, who were, again, great exporting business. They were trying to work out where they go next, and they ultimately formed a company called Fonterra.
Very famous company.
Very famous company. So I was there working with the farmers who owned it. This is a wonderful organisation, completely owned by the farmers who supply the milk. Yeah, it's a co-op. Yeah, and working with them on how to put Fonterra together, how to make it work, how to make it effective. They became very close friends, these senior farmers. Who the board was mostly farmers. Incredible people, wonderful people, and really privileged to be part of building what I think has become one of the iconic businesses and companies of this region.
100%, particularly in that environment. So what happened after that? What happened after McKinsey?
Yeah, so I then left there partly because McKinsey's a global firm. I loved Australia. Australia was a bit of a backwater for a place like McKinsey. My industries were, agriculture, resources, the primary industries, infrastructure. Did a lot of manufacturing work like I had at BHP with down at Port Kembla. And so they weren't exciting industries for a big global consulting firm like McKinsey. They were exciting to me. I love them, but not to their. And so I went off to a local Australian firm doing similar things, and with similar sorts of clients to what I had been doing, but I didn't answer to masters in New York or London or elsewhere, which suited me. And it also gave me more flexibility to do other things, including the family farming business. So I got more involved with some of what we were doing there. So that gave me flexibility, and I continued to work on in those sorts of areas. Probably the most exciting work I did there was building the iron ore industry up in the early to mid 2000s, as we saw China offtake and demand just exploding, and working with the team, the Rio Tinto iron ore team over in Perth, to build and grow and move from I guess a demeanour where they weren't growing at all to a mindset of just growing hard on the back of this incredible opportunity we saw in Asia.
And I guess that sort of to square that off properly, then you need to have quite a lot of experience in terms of building. They need new infrastructure. You've got to get the stuff out of the ground, and you've got to get it on the road, and you've got to get it to a port, and you've got to get it to wherever you've got to get it to.
Exactly, a railway,
port,
and it's all got to happen together. And if any one bit is not working, then you've spent all your money and you're not getting the outcome. And so, this is growth. Right. I mean, I love growth. I love a growing business. Our family farming business over the years has grown. Fonterra was exciting because it grew. Working in the mining industry in Australia was exciting because it grew and was world leading. I mean, these are amazing industries, absolutely fantastic. And I think we can do much more of that here in Australia. That world class, absolutely brilliant work that Australians are more than capable of, the really enterprising, growth-oriented approach. We need that across our economy. And I think it's missing, that enterprising spirit. It's there in all of us. I think it's absolutely at the heart of the Australian spirit, that kind of aspiration and enterprise. But I feel like over the last couple of years, we've been losing hope. We've lost faith in ourselves.
Well, I think it's got to a point now where people are saying, what's the point? Because I'm going to keep running into brick walls all the time. Every time, regulatory environments, like, the regulations, the workplace environment, it's, who I can and I can't hire. It's industrial rules, industrial relation rules. It's very, very difficult to be aspirational. And
it's incredibly frustrating. I mean, this is one of the things that inspired me to go into politics. One of the things we did when we were putting together Fonterra is we went to the government and said, there's all these barriers, please, we need them knocked down to grow this business. And we took away the monopoly. We made it a competitive business and said, bring in competition, go for it. That was the mindset. But if you're in a small business and you're being hit with regulatory barriers, you can't go to the government and say, hey, I need this fixed or I can't grow. You can't do that.
And not even any point going to your local member.
Yeah, look, it's so this is the point about stoicism. You're just sitting there saying, I just got to take it. But I think we can do better than this.
Do you think our stoicism has somehow worked against us in some respects? Because, as you're talking about farmers, it's raining, it's going to flood or it's drought, et cetera. Look, I can't do much about it, but I'm going to hang in there. I'm just going to keep going. So do you think that sort of has filtered its way into people in small business just generally? I can't do anything about it. I'm just going to stick with it.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there are people who you just say, I don't know how you get up each morning and do what you're doing when you're up against it the way you're up against it. And it's an incredible thing that has sustained so many Australian businesses and so much of our economy over and helped us to be so successful. The flip side is sometimes I think we don't push back and say, hang on, that's not good enough. We can do better than this. We need government to do better than this. And I think at the moment, the thing I see, which is very, very clear, is so many Australians just feeling like it's just too hard. It's just, I'm losing it. People who are trying to start a business or build a business, people who are wanting to buy a home and pay off their home. It just feels like you're up against it.
Especially the younger generation.
Well, I think that's right. And I mean, if you're, I talk to a lot of people who are parents or even grandparents who run a small business, and I say, so your kids or your grandkids going to come into the small business? Oh, no. Going to come back to the farm? Oh, no. And I think they'll go and get a job. Where I live, in Goulburn and where I grew up at Nimidabel now, they so often will say, no, I'm going to go into the public service. Now, we want great people in our public service. No question about it. But we need – what's that?
You don't want it as a default.
You don't want it as a default. You need people who are prepared to go out and have a crack and have a go. And if we lose hope, I think we lose what we are. So the number one reason for me to be in politics and to be doing what I am now is to restore that hope, to give to give Australians the opportunities I've had, because I feel like I have had opportunities like almost no other humans in history. I mean, it's been unbelievable for my generation. But if our next generation don't have that, I've got 4 kids. I think that would be just an atrocious outcome.
And so your entry into politics, I don't know, but how long have you been in politics now?
Yeah, 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
So it's relatively, you would probably in your 40s or something when you went into politics.
46,
Yeah, 46. So you've entered politics at your 46. Was it off the back of, okay, I made some money, maybe I've got kids, I've got a wife, I've got house. Now's my time to pay back. I mean, what was the deal?
There was a big element of that.
Did you talk to your parents about something?
Yeah, well, so my mum died when I was quite young.
Oh, wow.
And that was another part of kind of growing up on a farm, which was, that was a really big event, obviously, for my family. But my dad had been involved in farming representation, so he ultimately became president of the New South Wales Farmers and vice president of the National Farmers. And he was probably on a path to being president of the National Farmers Federation when Mum got cancer, and he just pulled back. This is the Taylor loyalty. He just said, "Nah, all of that is secondary. I'm not doing that now. I'm going to focus on family," and he did. And she died not long afterwards. But he was always interested in politics because it affected us. When you're around the kitchen table on a farm, I mean, back in those days, there was a collapse in the wool price. There was a floor price scheme for the wool price. But what governments did, and at the time it was the Hawke government, had a huge impact on us. And so it was around the kitchen table. So that's probably where I got interested in it. So the opportunity came up, mid-40s. Financially, I was in a reasonable position because I'd worked hard over the years leading up to that and got us to a point where I could take a risk. But
how did it happen?
Bill Heffernan was probably the key person who knew my family and knew me and had met my wife, who was a girl from the country, from out west of Dubbo. We'd met at Sydney University.
Just like your parents.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. He's just like exactly right. And Bill sort of said, Albie Schultz, who was the member for Hume, was retiring. He said you should run. And
just like that.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. That was pretty much it. And I threw my hat in the ring. Obviously, I had to go through the pre-selection process, and all of that.
But what do you do when that happens? When someone like Bill Heffernan sort of taps you on the shoulder? He's obviously a bit of a legend in the Liberal Party.
Yeah,
a legend in the Liberal Party, not a bit of one. And taps you on the shoulder, sort of effectively anointing you in some respects, mate. I think you could do this. Why don't you put yourself out of pre-selection? What is the process of someone like Angus Taylor? Do you go and talk to your dad? Do you go and talk to your brothers? Do you obviously talk to your wife? What happens in those situations? Because I've often wondered about that. How someone makes a decision, do they make it on their own, or do they make it in relation to everybody else that's around them?
Yeah. So the answer is all of the above, for me at least. First, my wife, who was interested in politics. So we met. She did law, and we worked together at law school in Phillip Street, and we were both country kids, so we had an enormous amount in common, obviously. And she was interested in politics. I think it wouldn't have been possible without that.
Right.
And she's actively written on political issues for many years. Her support was important. And so we made the decision and away we went. It was a big change of life. Big change of life for my kids too. They were young at the time, my 4 kids. And it's not easy for kids of politicians, I have to say.
Especially as they get older.
Yeah, exactly. Although they've been unbelievable, how old are your
really,
kids now? I'm so proud of them. So they're aged from 25 down to 19.
Right. Yeah. So, and you got boys or girls?
2 of each.
2 of each. Well, that was good. Yeah. Well done. Your wife, well done. Well done. Good on her. So you've got 4 kids. Yeah. You've decided to go into politics. Yeah. Obviously, one of the things I've often thought about myself, how do you... And I see that Peter got a little bit of criticism about this recently, but how do you put yourself in a position where I'm going to go from living in my nice, comfortable home here in Goulburn, or wherever you were living at the time, to spending 6 months of the year in aggregate in the mothership in Canberra?
Well, remember that I'd had work all my career where I'd been travelling.
Yeah.
That was, I could have been based anywhere. It didn't matter. I was travelling all the time. And so I was used to having to make sure I got home and had family time, and I've probably never been as good at it as I should have been. And you always look back at being a parent and think you could have done a better job, I think. But my kids have handled it so well, and I'm very proud that they've been able to do that.
So you're in Canberra, what I call the mothership, and you have to bump sort of shoulders. You're basically bumping shoulders with everybody. I mean, both sides of the room. What's it like? Tell us about, like, 1 minute you could be in the bear pit there, ripping into your opposite number, or alternatively copping it from your opposite number, which happens. Yeah. But then it's all over, and you're walking down the aisle, and maybe wherever you stay, you might be going down and have a bite at meal, and you might bump into Dr. Jim Chalmers. Yeah. So what happens in those situations?
Oh, you always say hello. I mean, I do.
Yeah.
And
does it get personal?
Look, I think when the boundary that most politicians really take exception to is that when it gets to family, and certainly that's for me, and maybe this is part of my loyalty thing. I think that's where it gets really difficult, and occasionally in politics that does happen, and that's when you say no, that's not. We're not.
Yeah, that's off limits.
That's not acceptable. Outside of that, look, it's rough and tumble. That's the nature of politics. There's an adversarial system. Our political system was designed that way from the start. And whilst lots of people think it can somehow be different from that, that's what it is.
Yeah, the opposition means you oppose.
Yeah, and opposition is tough because you are opposing. And
you're in a negative
that's your
state
job.
all the time.
That is actually your job. You've got to be holding the government to account, because if you're not holding the government to account, who's going to? The Australian people only get to hear about things that the government is doing that perhaps they shouldn't be doing because you're prepared to voice it. So it's a really important role in our system, but it's a tough role. And occasionally it does get quite brutal in the pit. But look, I've also had very good friends across the aisle in politics, and that does happen. I worry it happens less than it used to, Mark.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do.
So it's not a thing where what's on the field's on the field, what's off the field's off, like your mates?
Look, that's I certainly try to keep it that way, and I guess it's partly because I've played a lot of sport over the years.
Totally.
That's the right way.
And it's the Australian way too.
Yeah, it's the Australian way. It's not always true that way. I think it's become more tribal in my 12 years. It's definitely become more tribal, and I don't think that's a good thing. But that doesn't stop you having friends across the aisle. I mean, Joel Fitzgibbon and I, for instance, we do a 2GB segment every day on a Friday for years, and we've been very close friends right throughout. And I tell you, we'd give it to each other on that set, but it was from a point of respect, and you can
more
do
debate.
That. Yeah, it was debate.
It's not personal.
No, exactly right.
So, because I've been, obviously watching this current election process as it's unfolding, and it's starting to look personal to me.
Yeah, and I got to say,
which I'm surprised at.
Yeah,
I didn't think, I had the Prime Minister sitting there only a month ago or so, and I had Peter sitting there as well, and but I didn't think Albo would go that way, but it looks like it's getting pretty personal now.
No, and I think it is. And I don't like that.
Are we importing something? I mean, they're importing American politics to Australia, because it looks more like a presidential election to me than I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And it looks, and this loading up Peter Dutton with the Trump thing. Like, I mean, I know Trump. I know him. He was, he came here to Australia. I had spent time with him when the Apprentice was on. Peter's nothing like Trump. No. I can assure anyone listen. Peter Dutton is nothing like Donald Trump.
I can.
I mean, maybe they're both conservatives in terms of politics, perhaps, but even conservative is different. Peter Dutton is nothing like Donald Trump. He is a quiet, reserved, thoughtful, quite thoughtful person. He's quite economical in the way he speaks. He doesn't just throw stuff out there.
No.
And I'm not going to sort of opine on Donald Trump, but I'm just saying he's different, totally different. But this labeling of you guys as Trump-like, I find it like it's like they're trying to label you with the worst aspects of the Trump regime as it currently exists, and it's sort of like it's like playing a different set of rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's nonsense, and
but it's very politically clever.
But the important thing for me is, I went into politics because I want to fight for the issues that I care about. And it's all the issues we've been talking about. It's hardworking Australians getting ahead, making sure that they get an opportunity to have a real crack in business, owning a home, and that the circumstances are right for that. We need to have lower energy prices. We need to make sure that inflation isn't out of control. We need to make sure that interest rates are coming down so Australians can get ahead. Look, and that's what I'm interested in. I worry that our politics is moving away from those key issues. If it's getting to personal attacks the whole time, I mean, really, I don't think anyone ultimately wins out of that. But we are seeing some of that, and it's unfortunate. I think all we can do in the tradition of the Stoics when you're faced with those circumstances is just focus on the stuff that matter, Marks. And that's what I try to do every day. That's why I'm in politics. It's not playing political games that I'm interested in.
So you're a shadow treasurer. What is there that in that portfolio? I might just ask you, does small business, is there a ministry for small business?
There is, and Susan Lee has that, but obviously the economy's incredibly important to small business.
Does it come under Treasury though?
Well, no, it's separate. It's separate
portfolio.
But I would say a very substantial part of our focus is on making sure the environment is right for small business to succeed.
Right. So as in the macro and the micro environment.
Exactly.
And we're talking about interest rates, cost of power. They're the two big ones,
yep.
And particularly the cost of power. And I noticed in the Dutton's reply to the Treasurer's budget last week, he talked about gas reservation. But gas reservation, just for those people listening, just means basically somehow making sure that we park some of the gas that we produce in order to make sure that we don't pay more for it than anybody else pays for it, or we're not buying it from overseas. We're not exporting it overseas and then buying it back. So, but what actually does the Liberal Party have in mind in terms of getting the price of electricity down?
Yeah, well, in the short term, it's exactly what you were describing. We're one of the biggest gas exporters in the world.
Yeah, and we have great gas reserves.
We created the liquefied natural gas export business in the world. It was us. This was an Australian innovation. This is another incredible story of what Australians have done. We created that industry. Qatar and the United States have followed us, and we're the three big exporters in the world. And so this policy is about saying, okay, we're a good exporter, but we've got to make sure we've got enough gas here for Australians so that we're not paying more for our energy than we should be. And you've got to remember, of course, gas doesn't just affect the price of gas, it affects the price of electricity because gas is really important in generating electricity. It affects the price of food because it drives the fertilizer price, which is the single biggest input into your food costs, and many other things.
All the delivery costs, all the refrigeration costs, everything.
Everything. So driving down the price of gas is really important to making sure we've got affordable energy and that we beat inflation in this country. There's a simple way to do it, which is just to say there's got to be enough gas that stays in Australia and is for Australia. So Australian gas working for Australians.
As opposed to going off overseas, being liquefied and being shipped back to Australia.
Yeah. And so, there's always a temptation for a big exporter to say, look, if I can get a price of $20 in Japan and $10 in Australia, I'll sell it to Japan. Well, we're saying, no, we need to make sure we've got enough here. The exporters can make good money out of selling to their customers, and we want them to do that. That's good for our country. But we've got to, first of all, make sure there's enough gas for Australians. So that's the first and most important thing we can do to bring down the price. We've got to make sure our coal-fired power stations don't leave the market before we've got replacement.
Yep.
And over time, we've got to replace them with baseload nuclear generators. And if we want to have industry in this country, if we want to have manufacturing, data centres, those big baseload users of power that are important to job creation and prosperity as a country, then we've got to have baseload power. That's traditionally been coal. Renewables alone won't cut it. They can play a role, don't get me wrong, but they're not alone going to be enough to be able to support that baseload industry. And so that's why the nuclear generators are so important.
I think a lot of listeners are not that well versed in exactly what you're talking about. And if I might just break it down, then you can help me out here, if you don't mind. But first and most important thing is you said data centers, which, as you know, because we use everything, all our various devices all the time, particularly, with the advent of artificial intelligence, which is not just using ChatGPT, but artificial intelligence is everywhere. It's on Netflix. Yeah. Netflix is using it to tell you what you might want to watch. So there's artificial intelligence all around us. But as a result of that, there's these massive data centers, which, we don't actually have any data in the cloud. Yeah. They call it cloud, but the data's not sitting in my office, but it's now sitting in a data center. But data centers need refrigeration because they're very hot places. And they are extraordinarily big consumers of power. That's right. And as we become greater users of artificial intelligence, which is important for us to be productive and better at what we do and keep up with the rest of the world, we're going to have many more data centers here or maybe overseas, but we're definitely going to have them here as well. Australia's a great place for data centers already. We need enough power to power our homes, our offices, and our data centers, and anything else that might want to use power. Yeah. So that's your base load.
Yep. And if you don't have that power, they go to another country.
Yeah, and they will go somewhere else. And also something's going to cost us much more.
Correct.
It's going to cost us as consumers more. So, because we're going to be importing it. So you need a base load. The base load, what you're talking about, is gas, but it's also coal-fired powered, if they're the right words, power production for energy, for electricity. That's your base load. Now, over time, and everybody's gone bananas on this nuclear thing, it's not going to happen next year, but it's an over time thing. Nuclear is a thing you can do over time.
Yes, exactly.
But you're right now. We have to use what we currently got.
Yeah,
that's coal and gas.
That's right, and renewables. I mean, that's part of our system.
I'm definitely not ruling out renewables. It'd be great if renewables were the thing. But it's just not going to happen.
Energy systems throughout history have always worked better when they've got balance. You've got a range of different fuel sources because, coal works particularly well for customers that are there 24/7, 365 days a year, right? Whereas, if you're only using power during the day and you stick some solar cells on the roof, fine, works fine. It depends on the customer. The problem is if we don't have that base load power, which is what nuclear generators give us over time, and we need coal in the short term and gas as well, then you lose a big part of that customer base from Australia. They'll go overseas.
Well, what's the big deal? Why is everyone getting all weird about it? What about this nuclear stuff? What's the story?
I think because the Labor Party has campaigned against it. Albanese's been campaigning against it since he was a teenager.
No, but what about us voters? I mean, if we understand the proposition, the thesis, and the hypothesis that we need base power and we need what is these days technologically relatively safe systems, which is happening all around the world. Yeah. Why are Australians against this?
Well, I think Chris Bowen and others have been telling them a story that you can do it all with renewables alone, and you can't. And we know this already. We're seeing it. I mean, just look at your electricity bills. Mm. And here's the extraordinary thing that a lot of people don't realise about the last 3 years since Labor's been in power. There's been no material reduction in emissions in Australia.
Wow.
So here he is saying it's all going to be renewables only. We're going to be 82% renewables in our grid in a few short years. He's pumping that alone. He's making it difficult for gas, difficult for coal, certainly for nuclear. And meanwhile, prices are going up and emissions aren't coming down. It is not working. It's just not working. But why? That's why there's a better alternative. He's telling them it is working. I think Australians are switching onto this. I think they know it's not working.
I don't understand though, Angus. Why is he so against nuclear? I mean, I like the idea of all the alternative sources, solar and wind. It's great. All of them. I like all of them, and one will emerge as the one that underpins everything. But all I'm interested in is getting power to Australians at the right price.
Exactly.
So we're not suffering from inflation driven by high energy input.
Yes.
Because everyone keeps saying, your electricity bill at home. It's not about that.
Yeah.
Sure, my electricity bill's gone up. Everyone's electricity bills have gone up at home. But guess what? Every single thing you pay for that costs more money, a big input into that extra cost is the cost of producing that thing that you're buying.
Exactly.
Like, every service station that you buy a petrol from has got power.
Yeah.
And they have to pay the power bills.
Yeah.
Every television station's got power. They have to pay the power bills. All the power bills have gone up, not just at your home, but they've gone up not just domestically. They've gone up everywhere. And we have to address this issue. I know it's not your portfolio, but from a macroeconomic point of view, I just do not get what the big deal is with us exploring other alternatives.
Well, I actually think a lot of Australians are where you're at, which is that they are saying, well, we should explore these alternatives. There is a group that you remember well from the past who have been against nuclear from back in the 70s, when we had the nuclear disarmament party and all of that, Peter Garrett and Albanese, let's be clear, he was part of that. He was absolutely part of that kind of movement.
Yep.
And so he's never going to change. And Bowen is the same.
But do they have so much
Bowen
power?
Is the same.
Does he have so much power in their party to run the show and say, hey, listen, I've always believed in this. I don't give a damn what's better for everybody.
Yeah, but there's people in the Labor Party. I mean, the Australian Workers Union, for instance, has always been pro-nuclear, pro-gas. But, this is where the Labor Party's at now. I think it's a big mistake. They've now embraced nuclear submarines, of course, for Australia, which, of course, means that we're going to have nuclear generators because that's what you got in a nuclear submarine, a nuclear generator. It's a small modular reactor in our ports and running around our coastlines.
What's the difference between having a nuclear generator in a submarine, nuclear sub, in our port in Wollongong, wherever it happens to be, they're going to hang out, and not having one, for example, in Dubbo? I don't know.
It's a great question. It's a great question. And of course, that's the question that they've never answered. And this is what worries me is the quality of the debate on this from what we've seen from the government, from Albanese and his team, I think has been atrocious. But they're more interested in scare campaigns and politics than I think they are in the real policy. But I think we can win this debate. I think it's incredibly important. I think Australians are seeing that what the government's doing right now is not working. And I think they're up for alternatives, and that's what we're putting forward.
Talking about a debate, I saw Dr. Jim put up I think it was a post on X or somewhere like that, or somewhere someone said something that you won't debate him. So if he calls for a debate, are you up for it?
No, look, I have offered to debate him 26 times in this parliament. And he walks out of the parliament every time. He's not interested. Now he seems terribly interested. Of course I will. And we're having one next week and we'll do more.
Good.
So, yeah. Look, I'm happy to debate this bloke any time because at the end of the day, whatever you might think about Jim Chalmers, he is not someone who's grown up in the economy, deep in the economy, and understood the pain that Australians are feeling at the front line in small businesses as they're buying a house right now. And I think he's disconnected from that. I think he's out of touch, and I think he's out of his depth. I mean, he's come up through the political ranks as a staffer. That's his background. His degree was in his PhD was in communications, not economics, and he likes to call himself Dr. Chalmers. I just don't think he really has an understanding of what makes an economy tick. And I'm doing this because I think we've got to make our economy work better for Australians, and I think we can. But I don't think the Labor Party has understood what's needed.
So, inflation and interest rates, and their connectivity. The RBA, and it's interesting we're talking today because today is so-called Trump's Liberation Day. His day that I don't know what Liberation Day means, but it's the day that he announced his tariffs all around the world. And of course, the Reserve Bank governor came out on Tuesday this week, quite worried about, well, not quite worried. She looked perplexed. I don't mean in a defeatist way, but perplexed as to what the outcome of the tariffs globally are going to do to Australia in particular. It could either be deflationary or it could be go around the other way. It could cause a recession. It could cause any number of things. And she doesn't know what to do. Therefore, she didn't change rates. How do And everyone knows the response of Trump if you stand up to him, because we've seen what he does. He says, I'm going to increase it to 50%. Mm. Albanese doesn't seem to have said anything about anything. I haven't seen anything yet in the media. And I hope Peter Dutton say yesterday that he would fight for Australia. Do we run a risk of doing what happened when Scott Morrison was out around and China punished us forever? When Scott stood up and sort of blamed them for a COVID, or where he called for an investigation. It wasn't that bad, but he called for an investigation of China, or sort of thing, or that what happened in Wuhan. Do we run a risk that if we stand up to Trump, that it could backfire?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, but I think the starting point here is as an export-oriented country, as a country that has succeeded on the back of getting access to markets around the world for our agricultural products, for our mining products, our manufacturing products, our services increasingly. We want to get access to markets. It's incredibly important, and we should be fighting for that every single day.
Particularly the US market.
Yeah, and the US market is important. It's not. I mean, the Asian market, of course, has been the big growing market for us over the years, but it's still important.
Yeah, but Angus, if he punishes China, he punishes us.
Yeah, and look, the truth is, just right near where I live, there's a big abattoir, sells much of its meat to the beef to the United States, and we need those markets, and we should fight for them. The context with the United States is we are a close ally. We have fought with them in war after war after war, and we are strongly aligned. Our people have deep chemistry and connection. We always get on with Americans. Sometimes they annoy us a bit, and we annoy them, I'm sure. But we are close friends, and when you are close friends, you can have frank discussions, and we should be having frank discussions. We absolutely should be. I don't think we should be holding back in saying that this is not acceptable. We're not going to reciprocate and impose tariffs on you, but this is not what you do to friends. And I think it's quite right and proper that we do that. Now, frankly, I think Albanese is frightened of his own shadow when it comes to these things, whether it's the United States or China. I mean, China, we've got a warship off the coast of the south coast of New South Wales. Seriously, mate, stand up and stand for something. And it's true with the United States as well. I think we should seek to be friends with this administration wherever we can. But here's the difference. And we should be strong on that.
But how would it work, Angus? I see, according to the newspaper, he's recruited Greg Norman to go and try and sort of do a deal, which I'd imagine Trump would say, "What the hell are you doing here?" Yeah. To Greg, like I should be talking to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, Greg's a great Australian, but at the end of the day, I think part of the problem here is the ambassador. You got to ask questions about Kevin Rudd and whether he's doing what needs to be done, and whether Albanese is himself. Meanwhile, Chalmers goes over there a few weeks back, gets the photo opportunity, comes back, and of course,
nothing.
Nothing. I mean, I don't think they really understand how to deal with this administration, which is to be clear.
Do you think they're scared?
Whether it's with China or with the United States, there's no point when you want to have an ongoing trading relationship with somebody, and we want trading relationships with China and with the United States. You can't gild the lily. You've got to be straight with people and say, hey, this is acceptable and this is not.
So obviously we don't want to enter a tariff war with them, but do you think the experience of what happened, because with Morrison has actually made them a little bit gun-shy, politically gun-shy, because what I mean by that is the political fallout for Scott Morrison as a result of what China did to a lot of our farmers and all sorts of people, I think would have been quite immense. And I think Albanese then liked the fact that he made out that he brought that back into normality. He renormalized our relationship with China by sending Penny Wong or whatever he did, however he did it. Is it a position that the last thing I want in this election before this election is to be making noise and have Donald Trump say something about me? Do you think
but if that's right, and may well be, that's a political judgment, isn't it?
That's what I mean.
This is the point. You're playing politics. I mean, what we've always sought to do when it comes to foreign affairs and trade is not get weighed down by the short-term politics. Do what's right for the country in the longer term. And of course, You might pay a political price for that in the short term, but your job, if you're leading the country, is to do what's right for the country over time. And I think the right thing right now is to be fighting for access to those markets. Our farmers deserve it. Our manufacturers deserve it. Everyone else who exports into these markets and other markets deserves a government that's fighting for them. And we are not seeing that, and we should.
And let's say that we achieve nothing. In other words, nothing happens, and the tariffs remain in place. What do you think? In a prognosis sense, could happen here to Australia? I mean, what are the sorts of scenarios that maybe the Department of Treasury is sharing with you as the shadow treasurer? Like, what are the sort of things that might come up? What should we expect? Should we expect that all of a sudden China's going to start dumping all their cars here, or we're going to get deflationary pressures because a lot of stuff's going to come here from China really cheap because they've lost their American market? But as a result of that, they stop producing as much stuff. Therefore, we won't be exporting as much stuff to America, and as a result of that, we have a GDP problem. So
the whole point is all of those realistic scenarios. I don't think anyone knows which one of them is going to be right. But the one point that is clear is that we are living in a really uncertain world. And if that is the case, you've got to have an economy that is robust, that is resilient, and that is strong. If you're driving the deficit off a cliff, if you've pushed Australian household budgets to a point where they're at breaking point, then the capacity to absorb a shock is just not there. And this is what worries me most about the position we're in. We've just seen a budget with red ink as far as the eye can see.
At least 10 years.
$125,000 of interest and debt by the end of the next term of Parliament on the current plan. There's no plan to get our standard of living back to where it was when we were last in government until 2030 or 2031, a complete lost decade for Australians. And that means that's bad in its own right, Mark. I mean, that's a problem in its own right. But what makes it worse is when you're in that position, your capacity to absorb a shock is just not there. I mean, people just don't have the cash to handle another shock to their standard of
living. Nor does government. And that's the point. You've got no shock absorbers left in the system. And that's where this government has taken us. And it's why I think they've made a series of bad decisions without a focus on the need to rebuild to get our standard of living back to where it should be and to prepare government for the possibility, as there always is in time. Shocks do come along. That's the nature of the world. Economic shocks.
Yeah, exactly. But you've got to be ready for them. And this is something, again, perhaps it's me and my farming background. You're always got to be prepared.
That's what farmers are always doing.
Exactly. You're always ready. A drought's coming. One thing in a good season is the drought's coming. One thing in a drought is that it's going to end. But you've got to be ready for those shocks. And they can be price shocks too. It can be all sorts of shocks. But whatever it is, if your treasurer, if your government hasn't got your back on making sure we're ready for these sorts of things, then it's a problem. So during COVID, as you know, we suffered a shock, and the shock was the COVID shock, but the shock was a drop in. Well, for a short period of time anyway, there was a drop in employment because, and the government under Morrison and Frydenberg, we had those JobKeeper payments, etc. But a lot of the support in relation to dealing with the shock was coming from the government coffers. It was coming out of government. It was money coming from putting in infrastructure, but actually money going direct to into businesses, giving people money. If you're running deficits for the future, it seems to me the only tool we have left in our artillery is either for government to give, we suffer an economic shock, is for government to give people more money, or is to reduce taxes, or is to reduce interest rates. Fortunately, the Reserve Bank's done a great job at getting our interest rate up high, so that gives them plenty of leeway to reduce the rates. Like if we hadn't increased the rates from 0.1 to where they are now, we would have lost a lot of our ability to rebuild the economy back through reducing interest rates. But the big thing has always been in Australia is our resource sector. And our resource sector pulled us through the GFC. Our resource sector pulled us through a lot, gathered a lot of more taxes for the government, which more revenue as a result of many sold to China. If China falls on its knees
as a result of, which is what it looks like the tariffs are designed to do. It looks like it's directly pushing towards China. It goes everywhere, but it looks like it's picking China out. We want to reduce, this is what I think is happening, America wants to reduce China's position. That'll affect us. If we got no surpluses, and in fact we're running deficits, does that worry you?
It worries me enormously. I think this is exactly the point. I mean, the scenario where the Chinese economy doesn't get access to markets it did, so it goes backwards compared to where it would have, and we then lose an export market, not just through tariffs in the United States, but indirectly through loss of markets to China. I think it's a very dangerous situation for us because we're incredibly reliant on those revenues. I mean, here's the extraordinary thing. We've been getting massive windfalls from the sale of our commodities, from iron ore, from coal, from gas.
And the taxes on those companies.
And they pay, they pay company tax, and those company tax numbers have been huge. Right?
And this is where everything's been looking great as taxes raised.
Except that at the same time, we're now running massive deficits as far as
so we're spending that plus more.
So there's no structural balance here. This is a disaster. The windfall is all being spent and more. And so we are in a position, I think, where the risks for us are very, very high. That means a risk of some combination of a slow economy, potentially interest rates being stickier. Who knows? But certainly the Reserve Bank is ready for all of those scenarios. And the problem with this is uncertainty, and knowing that you're not prepared for a shock stops you investing in the future. That's the killer. I know the future of this country depends on us wanting to invest. Every single Australian, if wanting to invest in buying your home, wanting to invest in your business, wanting to invest in shares that can then take that money, companies take that money and invest themselves. If we stop being willing to invest because we're too uncertain about the future and we lack confidence in the future, then we won't go ahead. And that's we've got to change that dynamic.
So, can I just talk to you for a moment about, it's a bugbear of mine, but it's the Greens.
Yep.
I don't understand why and how this whole preference thing works. Labor preferencing the Greens and the Greens preferencing Labor. Well, although I think Albanese is on the record saying he won't preference the Greens. I think. I'm not sure because what happens if, the polls are saying that he's not going to do very well, but if he has the support of the Greens, he can be in a minority government.
Yeah. So let's see.
Where's the danger in that?
Well, huge danger. I think we need decisive, strong government at a time like this. Government that can actually get things done, because we've got to get our budget back into shape. We've got to get household budgets back into shape so they're able to weather storms that come at us. And we've got to restore hope, because it's when people have hope, that's when they invest in their future, and that's good for all of us. And to be able to do that, you need to have a government that's got a clear mandate, exactly as you say. I think there is a very high risk if Labor wins the election, in inverted commas, they only do it with the help of the Greens and the Teals, some combination of those. And I think that's a very dangerous looking government. The Greens don't believe in the Australia I believe in. They want everything to be taxed out of existence. They believe in much bigger government. They believe in red tape and green tape around everything, and that goes against everything I've been talking to you about today. But that's what they'll demand of Albanese, and this is a guy who wants to stay in power, and I think he'll do anything to do it. So let's see what happens with preferencing. There's two parts to that. One, of course, is the preferencing at the election itself. I'm sure that Labor and the Greens will swap preferences. And the second is what they would do if they were in minority government. Would they do a deal with the Greens, and what would be in that deal? Well, they're good questions. I think we can't afford that risk.
I've read Adam Band's stuff he puts up next. He's actually talking about if Labor gets through this process and that they do it and the Greens do a deal with Labor, that's great for the Greens, that they can now assert their positions. I've actually seen it. I've read Adam
Band. They're licking
Band.
their lips.
He's saying that. Whereas Albanese says, well, I'm not going to do a deal with the Greens. Yeah. But can he possibly not do a deal with the Greens?
Well, I think he will, because I think, power for the Labor Party is their reason for existence. I mean, they want to be in power, and I feel like sometimes one of our weaknesses is we want to constantly focus on doing good for the country. You've got to be in power to do that, so we've got to keep that in mind. But Albanese, I think, will do a deal with the Greens and Teals if he can stay in power to do it. And as I say, that's not the version of government we want to see.
Yeah, it's funny. It's about you mentioned something interesting a few moments ago about your values. It'd be great if somehow, instead of us sort of interpreting politicians and particularly those people who are leaders of each party, like, at a senior level like yourself and, of course, Peter Dutton and Albanese and Jim Chalmers, it'd be great if we could somehow get our heads around what are their values. Like really, really deep down what are their values. I mean, Albo was talking about, no one gets left behind, all that sort of stuff. I get that. But really, what are your values? Do you value what big business does for Australia? The amount of tax it pays, the amount of people it employs. Do you value what small business owners do? The amount of people they employ, the amount of the tax that those people they employ pay. When I looked at the last budget, I saw nothing in there that was small business friendly. In fact, they took the investment allowance out. And it was only a small investment allowance. They just got rid of it.
Yeah.
It'd be just good if somehow, somewhere, everyone was made write down your 5 most important values, so we knew what people stood for.
Yeah, as long as they actually told you what they really were.
Yeah, we want the truth.
I mean, this is why, as I get around the country, one of the things I'm most excited about is meeting the candidates that we've got running for us at this election, and that the range is incredible. So, from farmers to tradies to paramedics to one of your former employees.
Yeah, Scott Young.
From
Bennelong.
Exactly. And, these are people from the full range of backgrounds across Australia, an incredible group of people. And that is a huge strength for the Liberal Party. The weakness is they haven't got political backgrounds, and so they don't know how to play the political games. And I kind of felt like that when I came into this job. But I'd rather have that strength because I think they're the values of Middle Australia. I think they're the values of hardworking Australians who want to get ahead, Mark. And that's the party I want to be part of, and it's the party I'm very proud to be part of. So we wear our values on our sleeves. It doesn't mean we don't have differences. We do. And the thing about Liberals is, we're always prepared to debate. We do. That's too much sometimes. But I do think those values are strong, and our job, and we don't always do it as well as we can, is to get out and tell people that this is what we believe in. So small business, which was your original question, is such a big part of it. I mean, it's obviously my background. Farming is small business; they're the same thing. I know that it fuels so much of Australia. It fuels our communities. It fuels our local economies.
It's part of our DNA.
It's part of our DNA. And it's that enterprising spirit of Australians getting out there and having a crack and having a go and building a business. 29,000 insolvencies in the last 2.5 years. Record. I mean, that's 29,000 broken dreams, let's be clear. And, some businesses fail. That's the nature of things. But I think this is over the odds, and we've got to celebrate the incredible work that our people do in those businesses, because we all rely on it, and we all enjoy what they do every day when we go to the local cafe or pub or go to local shop, wherever it is. We eat. We're eating from the work that farmers do. So it's got to be celebrated. That's why so much of our policy is focused on that instant asset write-off, getting rid of unnecessary red tape, making sure our industrial relations doesn't make it impossible to employ casuals. This right to disconnect, which we think is something that should be worked out between the boss and the employee, not by the government. I mean, these are the things that we know are important to small business.
I mean, one of the things I often think about the Australian or the DNA or our original our origins. Is, mate, we had convicts who came out to this country in, a couple of 100 years ago, who once they got out of being a convict and they got freedom, they went off and built roads, built pubs, built farming businesses. Some of them were lucky enough to get a grand of land.
Yep.
That's where we started.
Exactly.
And then we've had immigrants who've come to the country, someone like my dad, who couldn't do what he did back in his own country, which is farming. So he had to take the nearest job, and he worked in a factory, but then started a little small business on the side.
Yeah.
So it is Australia's fabric. And for me, a party that's not even considering those people, and I haven't heard the word small business get uttered out of the Labor Party for a long time. And I will say, I'll go back to the Keating and Hawke periods. They actually appreciated small business owners.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
But today, it seems like it's a no-no area.
No, and there's a couple of influences here. One, there's a sort of a corporatist mindset, big unions, big business. And big business has an important role to play, don't get me wrong. I mean, it absolutely does, and the unions have a role to play. But if that's all you're focused on, you're missing a huge part of that economy, the really dynamic piece of people getting out there and serving Australians every day in their businesses. 2.5 million. And I think we should be celebrating that every single day. And I think the other thing is that people who are in business, who serve a customer, should be proud of what they do. I mean, I think part of what's happened in business is you're made to feel bad about what you do.
Yeah.
Well, you shouldn't. When you serve a customer, your business, when you're able to give a customer a loan to buy a home, I mean, that's a victory.
Yeah.
That is a noble thing. That is a truly glorious day for that person who's been able to get a loan, buy a home, and live the Australian dream. And we should be much prouder of what our businesses, and particularly our small businesses, do every single day. And
that's a good point, Angus. And it's funny, even I forget about the importance of that. And recently I was on a plane and I was going overseas, and the one of the attendants on the plane, she came up to me, she kept looking at me, she walked past, and eventually she stopped and said, look, I just want to say something to you. And she said, I want to thank you. And she was a woman in her late 50s, I would say. She said, I've worked for Qantas my whole life. She said, when I got divorced 25 years ago, she had adopted children. She said, I got left with the kids by myself, and she said, we had to sell the family home. She said, I was a single mother, 2 adopted kids, had a job at Qantas, had to borrow money. She said, I want to thank you because you're the only organisation who lent me the money.
Oh, there you go.
And she started tearing up.
How good is that?
And I thought to myself, I've been in this business for a long, long time. Yeah. And I thought to myself, that's a reason why I do what I do.
Exactly.
Because you can actually change people's life.
Yeah.
And it could be as simple and as commonplace as serving someone a coffee in the morning who's had a shitty night, might have been at the hospital with their kid, is dying to have a coffee, just a few moments of relaxation on their own, just to drink a warm coffee maybe on a cold morning, and you actually put that person in that position. That's what a small business does, and that's Australian values.
Exactly. I mean, if you work in a restaurant, you're a waiter or a waitress in a restaurant, and you serve a couple who decide, are proposing to each other.
Yeah.
Or this is the first time they've gone out to dinner and they end up marrying and having 3 kids, and this is what businesses do every day. And I don't think we celebrate them. I think at times business in Australia, probably particularly big business, has lost its way. I think, when business doesn't celebrate what it does for its customers and its employees and suppliers, it starts wanting to celebrate all these other things. I think it's losing touch with what it's there for. And I think we saw some of that in the Voice debate. And I think Australians roundly rejected that approach. But I think we get to that place because we're not celebrating the incredible work that these Australians are doing, and good on them. And we should be proud of what they do.
So we should be we've got to continue to foster small business owners in this country and all the people who work for them. And there's like, as you said, there's 2.2 million small business owners in Australia, but there's about 7 million people who work for them. Yeah, exactly. It's the biggest workforce in the country. It's double the size of the public service.
Yeah.
Double the size of the public service. And then big business accounts for about 10 or 15% of the employees. Whereas small business, we employ everybody, all of us. And, from farmers right through to people who install Elon Musk's Skylink, whatever is on top of your house. Yes, right. You probably have it in the farm.
I do.
Yeah, so do I. And it bloody works well. I have it in my farm as well. It works very well. So I knowing that you're coming here, and next week I've got the Treasurer himself. So I've given him and you, I'm going to give you the same opportunity to ask a couple of questions. And so the Treasurer has sent me 3 questions he'd like me to put to you. First question, Are you really going to legislate or have higher income taxes for everyone?
Absolute. You know, what's caused higher interest rates or higher income taxes, personal income taxes, yeah, for Australians is higher inflation. That's what's done it. I mean, we are now paying the highest rate of personal income tax that we have for a long, long time. They've gone up by well over 20% for the typical Australian family since Labor came to power, and that's what inflation does. Now, their so-called personal income tax cut, that'll be gone within a couple of years because you just wash it all away. I mean, it's 70 cents a day in 15 months' time. So this is complete nonsense.
2026.
Yeah, so it will be washed out of the system in no time at all. And under Labor's homegrown inflation, of course, we're paying a hell of a lot more personal income tax. So the job here is beat inflation. That's got to be the top priority. Get the budget back in shape, which Jim Chalmers has trashed. He's borrowing from the future to spend money and then put ourselves in a position where we can drive down proper personal income tax reductions. Of course, we have driven big personal income tax reductions when we were in government, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Scott Morrison.
Exactly. And so, you know, we'll always be the party of lower taxes. We also think right now what is important for immediate relief is to get that fuel tax down because there's so many Australians in our suburbs and regions who travel long distances who are under a lot of pain with mortgages, and that's the best way we can get them short-term immediate relief, not in 15 months' time.
So you are not going to have higher income taxes for everybody?
There'll be lower income taxes. In fact, we have a tax to GDP cap. We've set, Labor hasn't, and that says in the future we're not going to keep clawing back more money from Australians by allowing inflation to erode their pay packets. Okay,
so the second question he has, you have flagged cuts to health and education. Where specifically will those cuts come from?
We really should get these questions fact-checked, but anyway, I'll do the fact-checking for you because we haven't flagged any cuts to health. I mean, this is complete nonsense, or education. In fact, we've said that we will provide bulk billing incentives. We do think there's areas of government spending that shouldn't be happening. We do think that the public service has got too big in this country. And that it's making it harder for small businesses and others to find employees. But that's not in essential services like health and education. And in fact, we've announced in recent weeks, not only will we provide the bulk billing incentive to fix up the mess that we've seen with a big reduction in bulk billing since Labor's come to power, we've also been clear that we'll provide GP incentives, we'll provide extra mental health sessions and a very significant investment in mental health as well, which we know is a really big issue for many Australians. So our total spend there is actually in that area is bigger than Labor's.
That was announced in the reply.
Yeah, in budget and reply. He might have written the questions before then. I don't know, Mark. But
maybe you didn't read the reply. Yeah. And his third question is, he says, I've seen a lot of your policies mirror those of the current US administration. Why are you trying to emulate Donald Trump?
It's just, we do what is right for Australia every day. I'm sure Donald Trump seeks to do what is right for America, but we'll do what is right for Australia. We certainly don't support what they're doing with tariffs. The right thing for Australia is exactly the sort of things we've been talking about today. And I'm very proud of those policies in small business, in getting access to a home, in making it easier to borrow money, to get advice, all of the things that we stand for in allowing Australians to get on and get ahead.
So you're not all sort of sitting around there having a strategy meeting saying, Trump's done this and he won the election, let's do the same thing and we'll win the election here in Australia.
Oh, it's just absolute nonsense. I mean,
you didn't go and have an offside.
But I'm sure that's what the Labor Party thinks, and it just tells me they're pretty out of touch with what's going on, and certainly out of touch with what we're doing. And thinking the fact that they didn't even understand our health policies probably tells you everything.
So I'm going to give you, and I'll do it off camera, but I'm going to give you. So I'm not going to announce it to him, obviously, the questions, but I'm going to give him give you the opportunity to tell me, give me 3 questions to ask him without notice. Okay. In the interview I do with him next week. Finally, though, Angus, in one sentence, Why should Australians vote at this next election? Vote for Liberal and for the Nationals. Vote for the coalition.
We can't afford another 3 years like the last 3 years. We can do better, and that's what we are committed to do.
Angus Taylor, thanks very much.